chest now. And they say when the sky's cold and the sea's cold, baby, it's your time to go. Climb up the mountains underneath. But I say that my heart is telling me, so always be my home. We fall in and out of love with all misperceptions, reflections of ourselves inside. Yes, we fall in and
Now I have had to get out of the house. I've been sitting poring over pieces of paper, as you saw there, for about the last hour, doing a task, and that task is one of the final stages as I go through the process to become an associate for the Royal Photographic Society of London. Now, what they've asked me to do is they've asked me to do a statement of intent for my photography in 150 words. Now, you'd think that would be quite an easy task. Apparently not. And you saw me make mistake after mistake as I pored over the qualities that make my photographs unique to me. I did come up with a list though, and I came up with about 6 or 7 things. And the first one of these is perspective control. My workflow is such that it's really important for me to control my perspective, which I do with the use of longer lenses. And that allows me to pull the detail away from the distance and bring it right into the photograph. And then I set my field of vision by stacking photographs side by side. The second one was quite an obvious one, light quality. It's important for me to take my images in light that's very subtle and it's soft, and I do this by taking my photographs first thing in the morning or towards the end of the day, and I avoid harsh sunlight where I can, which you'll find in the middle of the day. This one's closely related to the third one, and the third one is colour. Some of my colours are actually quite strong, but they're subtle, and you're afforded subtle colours and tonal change when you take your photographs in a light quality that's good, so they go hand in hand. The next one is contrast and tonal depth. Because my shots are taken in subtle light, subtle colours, it's important that I ground the images by the use of some blacks and some tonal depth, and you'll often hear me talk in other videos about pulling detail from the shadow areas, and I do this as part of my workflow. The next one was texture. Again, because my colours are subtle, the light's subtle, the images are nice and soft, it's important for me to ground them not just with black parts or darker parts, but also with texture. And I generally do that with the use of grasses or rocks in the foreground of my pictures, just to give them some depth and some oomph. The last one I kind of struggled with. The last one I came up with is movement. Most of my images down by water, most of them are long exposures. And by long exposures I mean everything from half a second up to about 20 minutes. And one of the things that got me asking though is, what defines a long exposure? And I would say that's probably anything that requires a tripod. What difference do the various shutter speeds make to your photograph? And how long can we go? And that's a pretty good question. So I'm actually down at a wharf by Lake Rotorua, and the wharf's just over to my left here, and it's home to about 100 seagulls. And the 100 seagulls park here all the time. They don't go very far. I've never done this before, so this will be quite interesting to see how we get on. We've got plenty of daylight left, so I should be able to get all the way up to about 15 minutes. And I'll start off, I think, looking at the light just now, we're probably looking at something round about 15th or a 30th of a second, round about f8. So I'll go from a 15th to an 8th to quarter to half, 1 second to, and I'll keep doubling that exposure time until we go all the way up into the minutes. Right, let's go and do this. This is going to be fun. So I'm out on the wharf here, and just over behind me here you'll see all the seagulls on the wharf. Now they are resident here, so they don't go very far, and I'm framed up just in the middle of the wharf, where we can see the seagulls in the middle and water either side. Now my light metering here, f8 at a 30th of a second. So as the sun falls, light's going to reduce, but what I'm going to do is I'll start off with this natural reading, quite quick shutter speed, to see what difference it makes to the seagulls and makes to the water. And as we get longer and longer, the water, although it's quite calm, it does have some little ripples in it, will get flatter and flatter. Be interesting to see what the gulls do at 15 minutes. They might not even be there, they might move around, let's see what we get. Okay, I'm going to start laying these photographs side by side to show you some of the differences that these shutter speeds make. This first one here is at 1/30th of a second. That's the native shutter speed that I talked about in the car. Now you'll see here this shutter speed's actually fast enough to more or less freeze the seagulls on the wharf. It's enough to capture the landing of this duck in the water and freeze the splashes behind it. Now you'll also see in the water that the water, you can see the ripples in the water here quite clearly, and there's quite a bit of detail in the middle to far distance over here. Now if we go forward to 1 second, this is 1 second exposure, and we can see some difference already in the water here. We can also see the tiniest little bit of movement in the gull on the wharf here on the left, and we're starting to see some ghosting in the ducks on the water. Up to 2 seconds, the water both here and here in the near distance, as well as this midpoint here, has lost some of its detail. There's some wider or some longer ghosting here, and there's some more movement within some of these gulls' movement on the wharf. 4 seconds. Now 4 seconds, less detail in the water, both the near distance and the middle distance, both sides. This here is actually some ghosting that's almost become invisible as we've recorded this for 4 seconds. And you can see here there's some more ghosting in the ducks in the water and less detail over here. 8 seconds. Now we've got some real ghosting over here because this has recorded the movement for 8 seconds. This is more reflective, less detail, more reflective, less detail over here and in the foreground. And we're starting to now pick up some reflections of the sky in the water over this shutter speed. And you'll see that some of the gulls here have moved quite a bit. Some of them have stood still, but it's not quite long enough yet to move them all. 15 seconds. Some of the ghosting here is now becoming quite obvious, but we're starting to lose detail and density in the ducks on the water. This now is starting to pick up some real reflections of the sky, as is this side. This is more reflective, ghosting over here, but we're now starting to see increased activity in the gulls on the wharf, including this one here that's been flapping its wings for a part of the shot. You'll also see at 15 seconds just starting to see some movement in the clouds. 30 seconds. We've got a ghost of a bird here in the foreground. There's much less detail here right across the water because this is now starting to get to what I would describe as a real long exposure. And again, we've got quite definite movements within the gulls on the wharf and hardly any detail around the ghosting of the ducks, which are still here, but they're moving in that 30 seconds. And again, in the sky, some more stretching on the left hand side. So I've taken a few now and I'm up to 30 seconds, so I'm just going to get into the 1 minute realm. But in order to do the 1 minute one, I've got to use an intervalometer, which allows me to put the camera onto bulb, and lock this on for what will be a minute is my next one. So on for a minute, then 2 minutes, then 4, then 8, and I'll keep on going up until the sun disappears. So see what I can get. You should now start seeing that the gulls are quite blurred, the water's starting to smooth out, but as we get up to 2, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, you'll start seeing clouds streaking the sky, which is actually what I'm trying to achieve. I'll carry on as the sun's going down. This one here is 1 minute, hardly any detail in any of the water here, and we're not just picking up reflections in the foreground here now, we're starting to pick up reflections in this middle distance. 2-minute exposure. Now this is starting to get quite long. The gulls have settled down, but there's one here that's almost invisible, and this water has almost lost all of its detail now, and the reflections are becoming quite dominant in the foreground. But the main part of this is the ghosting of the clouds. We've got some definite movement now in the clouds at 2 minutes. 4-minute exposure. We've actually got some crazy effects here on the seagulls, as some of them have stood in the posts here and then moved, and they've almost become totally invisible. We've got hardly any detail here in the water. Quite a lot of reflections now here in the far distance, just below the landmass, but some quite definitive movement up in the top left corner here within the clouds. One of the things with taking extreme long exposures like this is that the inbuilt camera noise reduction, the thermal noise reduction kicks in, and it matches at 1 second for 1 second. So if I take a 4-minute exposure and the sensor gets too hot, it takes 4 minutes to cool that sensor down. So in that 4 minutes I'm waiting, the light's going further down. So just bear that in mind. If you're taking extreme long exposures, your camera may go into noise reduction mode for the same length of time that you've taken the exposure for. So something you got to factor in, particularly if you're trying to take 2 or 3 shots with very long exposures in falling light like this. So I am 135 seconds of noise reduction left. That's just over 2 minutes, and then I'll take my 8-minute, and it'll take 8 minutes to cool that down as well. So that's probably all I'm going to get, because that's another 15 minutes and the sun's going to be down by then. So in falling light, you've got to calculate in falling light. So I'll maybe leave this last one open for 10 minutes if I can, and that should make that water silky smooth, and it should really start moving the clouds as well. 100 seconds, come on. I am up to 4 minutes, but because the light's falling so fast now, I'll probably push this out to 10-12 minutes, which should start making a difference to these clouds, which will be nice. Oh, lovely night. Now this one's 15 minutes, and it's actually worked out pretty well. Look at the gulls are completely transparent, and you can see the wharf and the wire through them as they've moved around so much during this long shutter speed. The water though has completely flattened off and has absolutely no detail, and I would describe this as high key. But look at the clouds, they've been blown to the left from the right, and the right hand side has caught the colour from the setting sun to the dark greys and purples on the left. Now that is what 15 minutes will do to your shot. It's a bit of fun, and I actually quite like it.
Reflections of ourselves inside.